What can one say about pure visibility, he asks us, if not that it is born in the divergence, l'écart? But the divergence is not nothing, nor is it something, nor is it that by which there is, in the sense of a condition of possibility. Being as transcendence, then, must be thought in terms of the Gestalt. This notion gives us a principle of differentiation, beneath which we cannot go, because it is neither in the object nor provided by the subject, because it is at once a segregation of the figure and the background, and a segregation of the seeing and the visible. It is the formula of a slippage of the same kind appearing, and that which remains latent, such that each visible has its invisible double and can return to itself. The line becomes a vector, the quality a dimension, the image a category, and the sign a symbol. And finally, it is the formula of our own inscription in the field that we see. We cannot be attentive enough to the fact that Merleau-Ponty entitles his final essay, Eye and Mind. He thereby names his entire oeuvre. He gives voice to his desire, which was to circumscribe man's opening to the world through the eye. Given that this desire seems to govern all of metaphysics, it is all the more important to interrogate it. Is it not Plato already, as Heidegger shows, who pushes the word eidos in order to make it designate essence, even though it designated the sensible appearance of the thing, and who caused that which does not appear to the body's eyes to spring forth for a pure gaze? Did Plato not begin a movement that will sustain vision's privilege up until Husserl, and, despite the largest variations, conserve the link from truth to the intuitus mentis, or to the Wesensschau? Let us not be too quick to reduce the mystery of this privilege. We like to believe that the eye is the organ of possession at a distance, that it provides a natural support for the spirit tempted by the capture of being, that in the exercise of its powers we find an anticipation of the withdrawal of thought, and the setting up of its domain outside of the sensible. But to conceive of metaphysics as a sublimation of vision would be to forget that metaphysics interprets and modifies vision at the very moment that it subjects itself to it. And one might conclude that this interpretation is not the solitary work of philosophizing individuals. Because the interpretation springs forth at a certain time from collective techniques and from their convergence, which remains to be thought, it would remain true that it implies the institution of a language, the advent of a relation with the world that the life of the body could never justify. This would be to act as if we knew what is sublimated, and to forget again that this knowledge emerges in the wake of metaphysics, and that our reference to vision is burdened with the prejudices that it has placed upon it. Merleau-Ponty teaches us to return to precisely this forgetting, and thanks to him, we have learned to reinterrogate the moment that the thought about seeing destroys seeing, turns into its object, and simultaneously becomes lodged there. But his approach does not leave us free to ignore what it owes to the conditions in which it is instituted. Whatever his approach might make us think about vision, vision only draws all the other questions to itself in virtue of a preeminence acquired in culture. Given the status accorded by Merleau-Ponty to the eye, we must recognize that this thought is inscribed within the orbit of metaphysics. Indeed, the signs of this inscription abound in reading Phenomenology of Perception. Its style of argumentation, its desire to address the entire collection of questions the tradition has set out as the domain of philosophy, even the presentation of the work, arranged in such a way as to support the continuous movement of an inspection of spirit. None of this allows us to doubt the identity of the enterprise. As critical as it is of previous systems and of the very notion of the system itself, the work bears witness, in order of its discourse, to an ideal of demonstration and totalization that adheres to the reign of metaphysics. If we wanted to ignore this adherence, we would fail to stress the audacity of our philosopher. We would preclude ourselves from being able to fully measure it, because he demonstrates this audacity through what Hegel called the patient work of the negative, a work that, from within philosophical thought itself, undermines some of its dominant categories and creates the need for a regime change. Merleau-Ponty acquires the power of decoding this necessity by remaining within metaphysics, which is different from those whose emphatic discourse about the end of metaphysics makes one suspicious that they have not understood anything about its beginning. And this remaining within metaphysics also presupposes, along with the truth of an attachment, the sign of an imprint. In fact, rather than being surprised, we should learn from the difficulties and hesitations in the movement of a study that, from its very beginnings, includes the most novel advances. If the language of the preface to Signs, Eye and Mind, and the visible and the invisible is already spoken in some particular essay in Sense and Nonsense, or in Phenomenology of Perception, and if this language is still not understood or intended to the point of requiring sacrifice of all previously adopted conventions, we are tempted to chalk this up to a weakness. Yet we can only make this judgment by leaning upon the experience that Merleau-Ponty introduced us to, or again, we learn from him which were his enduring insights and which were merely his tentative first steps. Such should be our reading of the early works, By discovering the influence of the tradition on the early writings, we must not forget that the later writings are what give us the power, at least to a large extent, to recognize this influence. And if we conclude that the status granted the eye still serves the glory of metaphysics, let us not conceal the fact that this idea comes to us from a dialogue with a philosopher who interrogates vision as no other has.